Talk a little bit about what you've seen.
Yeah, so, I've worked on immigration for quite a while, and, I just wanna go back. Last year, um, Stephen Miller repeatedly outlined their plans for what would happen if Trump won. Now, Trump would sometimes say it at rallies, but when he was in forums that it wasn't just his base, he would talk about just going after the worst of the worst, and many people believe that. But the plan was always for mass deportation, millions of people. Stephen Miller has the plan in place. He actually called it the greatest infrastructure project in American history. Like, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but he actually thinks of it this way. And we are seeing it play out. And I think it's shocking for a lot of people. It's horrific. There's video um, today from United Farm Workers with ICE vehicles chasing farm workers through the fields. And I think one of the things that's happening is, we knew this was going to be horrible, and seeing it in happen is horrific. Communities are fighting for community members, and Stephen Miller is the mastermind of this, and in many respects, he's calling all the shots in the White House. Let's not pretend otherwise. This is a vile human being. And what's happening right now is the implementation of a mass deportation plan. It is it's impacting communities. As you said, they're just picking people up. They don't care. And, you know, it's really been I almost it's awful, but people like to see it to believe it. Like, I think a lot of people, and you see these comments all the time from Republicans, Latinos for Trump down in Florida, the woman saying, "This is not what we wanted. This is not what we voted for." 6 or 7, 8 members of Congress yesterday in Axios, Republicans saying, "Well, this isn't exactly what we thought was gonna happen." Well, you know what? It was exactly what they said was gonna happen, and every member of Congress and the Republican side is enabling it. And I want to let people know, you think it's bad now. The horrific GOP budget bill, which will, give tax cuts to Elon Musk and Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos, and cuts Medicaid and cuts SNAP and could undermine Medicare, also has $150 billion for Stephen Miller's to implement the rest of his agenda. And I think it's really important. And I think a lot of our listeners and people who are joining the Substack understand this is not just about immigrants. They are using immigrants as an excuse to destroy the Constitution, basically. They want to undermine democracy. Trump has said he's a dictator. He meant it. We're seeing it play out. So it's really ugly right now. It's what's coming from Trump and his minions is very ugly. I think what we're going to see is a lot more pushback from people. And I have to, Mike, I mean, we've both been frustrated with Gavin Newsom. His speech last night, I thought, was really important. It was a message to Democrats
Absolutely.
around the country.
To your point about, these people saying we didn't vote for this, this isn't what we thought. I mean, let's be clear. Trump is playing to a base that includes a lot of hardcore extremist white supremacists and people who have been having a wet dream about this moment. And of course, Stephen Miller is one of those people, and he speaks to them. And that's like a core part of the base. And then you're right, there are all these other people who voted for Trump and kind of wanted to believe what they wanted to believe, that he didn't really mean it, or, he said it was just going to be criminals, even though, a couple of times he said, well, if a mother has to be separated from a child, that may happen. So he kind of hinted at it, but he gave people the ability to believe what they wanted to believe. And now we're just seeing the way it's playing out, and suddenly they all have these regrets. And that's where Trump, he overplays in terms of what the public really wants on the issue of immigration. And that's why I'm glad that Gavin Newsom stood up to him and said, go ahead and arrest me, because Trump always goes too far and then kind of can't back down. And that's what the public needs to see. And that's what people are seeing right now in Los Angeles. The polling is showing that people do not support these kinds of raids. And the polling is now showing that people don't want to see military in the streets. They don't want to see the Marines in the streets. I saw a report that the White House is happy with the way things are working out. They're in their own bubble. And as you said, Stephen Miller is running everything. But I really believe, and I've said, people should not be afraid of Donald Trump. They need to do what Gavin Newsom did. And now let's talk about Gavin Newsom and the response, because we've all been frustrated with Gavin Newsom, angry at his pivot in the last few months. And I'm sure we'll be criticizing him more, but he met this moment. Maybe he didn't think this was going to happen. He thought, he could be one of these Democrats who was going to work with Trump, because we heard all that, right? And maybe he thought this wasn't going to happen, but he realized he had to do something, or he might have realized this was his political moment. I don't really care. He spoke up. He did something that all Democrats can and should do, and they could have done from the beginning of Trump's presidency. He just announced, I'm going to have a speech to the nation. And you say, how could a governor decide he's having a speech to the nation? Well, in this environment, with this media, um, the media will cover it, and everybody covered it wall to wall. And he was, you know, I thought a a model for all Democrats to look at and say, this is the way we need to do it. He didn't pull any punches. He called him an authoritarian over and over again. He went far beyond immigration. He talked about, of course, the people who are not criminals, the people who are dishwashers, who are people working on day laborer jobs, people who are just being stopped on the streets, a 4-year-old, a pregnant woman. He talked about all these people. He talked about the issue of immigration and the issue of free speech and protests. And yes, he spoke up against the scattered acts of vandalism, and said, people would be punished. But he went on and talked about the attacks on universities, talked about the attacks on free speech, talked about the attacks on the law firms, and really took Trump on in a big way that I think people were so waiting for in the base of the Democratic Party, and also just all Americans who care about this issue beyond that very radicalized white supremacist MAGA base on the party.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and I think, the fact that he talked about all the issues, the panoply of issues, this is an authoritarian government right now that is trying to control America. And yes, um, obviously, immigration is a part of it, and they're using immigrants to as an excuse, and they've talked about this invasion for a while. The only invasion we've seen is the invasion of Los Angeles by National Guard and Marines. It's despicable what is happening. This is not an immigration issue anymore. This is literally a fight for our democracy. And we knew it was coming. They've been very clear about it. We are at that point, and that's why it was important for leadership. Now, the folks on Capitol Hill, and I think one of the things we've been frustrated with Democrats on Capitol Hill, they live in that Capitol Hill bubble, and everything they see is through the lens of what happened. We have seen some great leadership. I'm not discounting. We have, AOC has been terrific, and Jasmine Crockett, Maxwell Frost. We've had some great, and a lot of them are the younger members who are speaking out and understanding the moment we're in. But I kind of thought it would probably have to be a governor who would speak out. Governor Pritzker's been really great. My own governor from Maine, Janet Mills, taking on the president. They've been.
Perfect.
We need more of that, and I think we will see more of it. I think. And it is surprising to us after the past few months of where Newsom has been doing podcasts. He did a podcast last week with Dr. Phil. Dr. Phil was embedded with ICE this past weekend. I think the other thing is, one of the things that Newsom has also done, Mike, is mocked them. He has called them. He's done it on social media. A lot of it's on X that finds its way over to Blue Sky and other places. But he has called them out. He has called them out. He's brought back January 6th to them. You're talking about the flag. Here are some flags that were used on January 6th. He's really done an important job. And the thing is, part of fighting fascism is you have to mock them and not let them think they are omnipotent. And I think that was good too. That's another piece
Yes.
of it. But, yeah.
He's also been mocking Donald Trump's mental stability and his decline. several of the posts he put up focused on Trump not remembering that they had a phone call. Whether Trump was lying or he truly didn't remember is another issue. Although at one point, Trump tried to prove on some podcast that he spoke with Newsom and he showed the timestamps of the phone calls and they were the wrong day. So he is losing his mental acuity, and Newsom really focused on that and mocked him. And to your other point, he went on the offense. And on the issue of immigration, you have to go on the offense. Otherwise, you lose. You let them frame it. Trump thinks he's framing this issue right now. And what Newsom did was turn it around and went on the offense. And that began when he said to Tom Herman, come and arrest me. Go ahead. It really threw them off. That was a moment where they didn't know what to do. Homan backtracked, and Trump doesn't like backtracking. So Homan backtracked, and then Trump, when asked, said, yeah, he should arrest him. Right. So it was very muddled. And of course, then Trump overplaying, because that exposed to the American people how extreme he is. Then Trump was asked, what would you arrest him for? And he said, for getting elected, which is dumb, but also threatening. Right. And then Homan was asked again, and he backtracked again. So it really threw them off. And he then continued in that going on the offense. And then when he announced that speech, he stole the media. He shifted the narrative. He took the platform. And we've seen spurts of this with Democrats. You know, when Cory Booker gave the speech, the 25-hour speech on the floor, you know, we've seen spurts of it. We've certainly seen the Democrats like AOC and Jasmine Crockett who've taken the moments that they've had, whether in Congress or at a press conference. But what he did is the kind of thing they all should be doing every single day, and understanding that the American people are with them.
Absolutely. And I think that Josh Marshall from Talking Points Memo, who I think does a very good job the other day, made it clear that part of what we're dealing with is a fight for public opinion, public sentiment. And we have the MAGA base. They love this. That's who Stephen Miller is feeding. But there's a big swath of people, some of whom are like saying, this isn't what I voted for, even though they did. And
That Latinas for Trump group in Florida.
Yeah. And who are realizing, this is not so. What Democrats are fighting for as much as anything is the hearts and minds. I mean, I hate to, not to trivialize it, but it's important for people to know, and to create a contrast with what Trump is doing. And it really is just there's something so wrong with the idea. I mean, this is literally in the Declaration of Independence, where, they forcing troops into communities. This is what he's doing, like sending the Marines to Los Angeles. And, even the LAPD has said repeatedly, we don't need you. We don't need, and LAPD are no saints, right? So,
there's no disturbance of any kind. There's no earthquake. Thankfully, there's no terrible storm, fires. Everything you deal with, natural disasters that you ask the National Guard to help in a crisis, and the governor asks for that. That's when it happens. This was a president using it spur of the moment, not like back in the 1960s when repeatedly we had civil rights violations in Alabama by the governor and warnings over and over again. No, this was, I'm doing this. And Newsom even explained how he was on the phone with Trump just before that. Trump said nothing about the National Guard. They had a good conversation, said nothing about the National Guard or anything. He just did it. So that's what people have to realize. And he's going to do it again. There are now protests all over the country. We've seen in Austin, in Dallas, other places, people turning out in huge numbers, police getting very, forceful and aggressive. And that's the other problem we have to be worried about, that police now, and I think we're seeing it in Los Angeles too. And it's problematic. The mayor and the governor, Newsom probably too, are so worried about making sure they can show they don't need the National Guard that they're letting the police do things that are really violent and gross. We saw the LAPD doing horrible things, trampling on a protester, right? The mayor put a curfew in last night. So this is what we also have to worry about at the same time, that as local officials are trying to show they don't need the National Guard, local law enforcement may be getting tougher. Here in New York, we had thousands of people protesting last night down at the federal building. We've had terrible raids. We've had kids taken out of classrooms. We've seen in Chicago last night there were huge protests, and the police getting really aggressive. So we have to be careful about both what's happening with local law enforcement as well as Trump looking for opportunities to send in the military. And then, of course, Saturday, the big protest, the No King's Day protests, Trump making a threat that if there are any protests in Washington, and thankfully the organizers had the foresight not to organize any protests in Washington, that they would be met with heavy force. The idea that a president was saying any protests would be met with heavy force. Free speech. He didn't say if people are violent or they're vandals or anything. He said heavy force. This is how he's talking.
He's a dictator. He's an authoritarian dictator. And look, he's the mouthpiece for it all, right? There's a lot of people behind him who are backing it up. Of course, Saturday, he's having the big military parade in his honor, which is just like straight out of North Korea. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. And people in DC are worried. Literally, the concern in DC are
And you're there.
roads.
You're there. You're seeing it
Yeah.
play out.
Will the roads hold up? Will Constitution Avenue survive the tanks rolling down the street? But I think it's really important. The protests around the country are so important. The No Kings protests. We're going to do live coverage on SiriusXM Progress that day. It is really important.
Everybody should be tuned in. SiriusXM Progress, noon to 3 p.m. You'll be hosting and speaking to people across the country at all the protests that are going to be in cities, towns, rural areas, just like the hands-off protests.
Yeah, and I think these protests are going to be even bigger right now because we do have someone who thinks he's a king. When you can say you're going to, go after protesters, that's what a king says. That's what a dictator says. And I feel like Trump is, and it is interesting. I want to go back to something you said. The media coverage. You see some media coverage. Now, Greg Sargent, who's a good friend of yours and mine, been on your show many times. I've interviewed him at the New Republic. Has a terrific piece. Yeah, he has a terrific piece today about how so many in the media are just gobbling up the White House spin, despite what public opinion is showing. And even there's a New York Times article, is this rough for Democrats, which is a typical New York Times article. But I feel like anything you see today doesn't matter. Anything you saw, I'm sure Goldmacher, who wrote that piece, started working on it last week. Last week is a different world. We're in a new world now. We're in the world where everyone has seen that Trump is willing to use the military in American cities against Americans. And we're also seeing more and more ICE raids to fulfill Stephen Miller's fantasies and the cruelty that they're engaging in. And it's everywhere. I mentioned the United Farm Workers in the fields. Omaha yesterday had a raid. And I just to jump back to immigration for a second, I think it's important. Who's relied, and we've talked about this a lot, relied on the labor of undocumented workers for decades is Donald Trump. There are so many businesses in this country. All those rich farmers out in California who welcomed J.D. Vance and supported Donald Trump, they thought they were immune. They're not. So farmers are getting a double whammy. They're getting Trump's tariffs and Trump trying to take their workforce. And the healthcare workforce is going to be undermined. The caregiver workforce, not just from undocumented workers, but from taking away legal status from hundreds of thousands of people. Afghan soldiers, folks who helped our soldiers are being rounded up. This is really horrific. And don't think, and I know people who are listening to us understand it, but don't think for a second this is not going to impact every single American in some way or another. Like everyone knows someone undocumented. And I used to, Mike, we get a lot of callers. We get callers on the phone and they'll call up and say, deport everyone. I'm like, and I just say, did you eat today? Because if you ate, the food you ate came through the hands of an undocumented worker at some point. The buildings, look, Kristi Noem is the head of Homeland Security. She loves going out doing photo ops. She's also in charge of FEMA. They want to get rid of FEMA at the start of hurricane season. I mean, this administration, and plus what we saw, what Kennedy is doing at Department of Homeland, HHS, Health and Human Services, they are putting our lives in danger in every single possible way, in addition to threatening to use the military against us.
Yeah, I want to say it's on Sirius XM Progress 127 because some people in the chat were asking when is the live coverage of the No Kings protests, and I want to talk about those for a little bit in a second, but I just want to refer back to the media. You're absolutely right. The way the media is covering this, Politico did a whole thing today on how Trump is in his element as the commander in chief and leading the nation, and he had that rally at Fort Bragg, and he made the troops jeer at the former president of the United States, made them jeer at a sitting governor. Grotesque, right? And they're like, oh, but the other thing that they're doing is they politicize every single thing. Like when Gavin Newsom gave his speech last night on CNN, you think that right afterward they could have people who are like experts on the military, experts on policing, experts on immigration, talking about the crisis that's been created. Instead, they have a political pundit who's a radical right winger, Scott Jenkins, right? And Kate Bedington, who's a former Biden campaign aide and in the administration. And like just talking about the politics of his speech, like, can't we for a moment talk about the crisis that we're in here and not make it all, a political thing? Now, I want to talk about the No Kings protests because I really think they're brilliant the way the organizers have done this, certainly going back to hands off and having local protests all across the country, obviously, rather than having people spend all that money and time coming to Washington. And by the way, people can go to nokings.org to look where there is a protest near them. But they've been always perfectly timed. Like they seem like spontaneous uprisings to what's happening, and they will be about immigration now for sure, and about police presence and about the military presence and all. But it's just like the first ones, the hands off. They were so successful because it seemed like they just, were spontaneous in response to Elon Musk, pillaging our government agencies. And they had that effect, and the public saw that. And it really kind of galvanized people across the country. And I think that it also it shows enormous power, and it creates a local story for every newspaper, magazine, online source, television station all across the country. It makes this whole issue local. It's so brilliantly done. And I think you're right. Many more people are going to turn out. And it's so important that people turn out because public opinion is what we have right now. It's the most powerful tool we have. We don't have Democrats in control of any chamber of Congress, any of the two chambers of Congress. We obviously have Trump in the White House. The only thing we have is public opinion, and that's the only thing that's going to help us to shift that power in Washington.
Yeah, absolutely right. And, I think, again, brilliant work,
Scott
indivisible
Jennings,
public
not
citizen.
Scott
Huh?
Jenkins. I meant Scott Jennings, not Scott
Scott
Jenkins.
Jennings. Yeah, yeah. But yeah, brilliant work by all the organizers who put this together. And there are, I think, about 1,500 events around the country. And what's important, it takes it out of DC. Like, I think this conversation, that's why I like the kind of the bubble of DC, the Politicos and the Axios and, those kind of gossipy publications. And they're always looking for little tidbits from Capitol Hill. And they're listening to the White House tell them, oh, yeah, we think we're winning. That's all bullshit. What's happening in the real world is the real world. I do not consider DC. I mean, I don't consider from the Capitol to the White House the real world. DC is a very real city with wonderful people and a wonderful community. But that DC kind of Capitol Hill bubble mindset is not reality. They all kind of feed off each other. Every member of Congress, all 435 of them, are up for election next year. These protests are happening in all of their districts. A third of the Senate's up. They pay attention to what's happening. They see their local media. Now, we need more local media. We need vibrant local media. But one good example, I will tell you, is Joni Ernst, when she said we're all going to die, it was the huge headline in the Des Moines Register, and it was massive coverage around the state. And PPP did a poll a couple days later. 70%, just about 70% of people in the state knew it. That's how it resonated. People will see these protests. They'll see it covered in their local media. They'll attend them. Their members of Congress will too. And I combine this Mike, with something we're probably already going to talk about, but special elections that have been happening around the country. Now, it's something I cover a lot. I get to speak with wonderful people who are running. Some of them win, some of them don't. Two of the candidates I talked to in Florida and the Space Coast, Brevard County, they didn't win yesterday, but they overperformed in Florida by 11 points in one district and 9 in another. That's a big overperformance. There's a massive overperformance in Oklahoma. Democrats are showing up, and it's not. And it, G. Elliott Morris and others. He's a pollster. Used to be 538. He's got his own Substack. He got a piece on it today. He said it's not just Democrats showing up. Yes, Democrats are showing up, but middle of the road people are showing up. People who even some Republicans aren't voting in the numbers they want. And this has been a consistent pattern. David Neer and his colleagues at the Down Ballot track this. The overperformance by Democrats this year is about 13 or 14 points, which is really significant. It's higher even than it was in 2017. And I kind of feel like that does not go unnoticed either. And I feel like, that's one of those things that, the kind of DC political class, they're so used to, the political reporters are so used to getting their info just from Capitol Hill and others. There's something happening in the country, and I think it's the special elections plus what we'll see this week. People do not like what Donald Trump is doing, and the intensity is increasing.
The third thing that's happened, of course, are the town halls that we've seen all across the country. And I think that has also worked in tandem with the special elections. But yeah, I wanted to get to the special elections because we had more last night. You referred to Democrats overperforming in huge ways in places where Democrats would be expected to win, overperforming by like 30 and 60 points, right?
Yeah.
And then in places where Democrats aren't expected to win, and this is throughout the whole year, either winning or overperforming in a way that should scare Republicans heading into these midterm elections. And of course, we have two big elections coming up this year that are often bellwethers: Virginia, the governor's race, and of course, the legislature, and New Jersey. Last night, we also had the Democratic and Republican primaries in New Jersey. Representative Mikie Sherrill will be now running as the Democrat to succeed Phil Murphy. Tell me your thoughts on that race and on Virginia, too, even though they obviously didn't have the elections last night.
Yeah, the Virginia primaries.
This is all the good, and we need the good news.
Yeah, we need the good news. We need to find our joy. Virginia's primaries are next week on the 17th. So yeah, this is going to be what Jack how do you say his name?
Ciattarelli, I think.
Ciattarelli, yeah. He got endorsed by Trump, and he used to be kind of a moderate-ish, a New Jersey Republican. Used to be kind of New Jersey Republicans who are sort of moderate. I don't believe there are any exist anymore, but he went gung-ho Trump. And he came pretty close in 2021 against the incumbent Phil Murphy, but 2021 was a bad year for Democrats. It's the first year of the Biden year. We had just had the Afghan pullout that didn't go well. It was still COVID. People were still cranky. People were angry. And the Republicans won the governor's race in Virginia that year, and then Murphy eked it out. So the Republicans think they've got to... Huh?
Like maybe 3 points he won by, right?
And the Republicans think they have a chance, but this is a very different year for all the reasons we've been discussing, the special elections, the protest. Mikie Sherrill's a great candidate. She's in many ways, very similar to Abigail Spanberger, who will be the nominee in Virginia. Spanberger's opponent, Winsome Sears. I mean, if you want to know MAGA, hardcore, intense, extreme, look at the GOP candidate in Virginia for governor. Right. Really hardcore, as is the Republican now in Virginia.
And on the Democratic side, in both Mikie Sherrill and Spanberger, you have two people who served in government. Mikie Sherrill went to the Naval Academy. They both have served as people who are patriots and who serve this country and are going to stand up against the pillaging of our institutions. And they both know each other too, which is another interesting kind of a thing. And you're right about the Republican candidate in New Jersey. He came close with Phil Murphy back in 2021, but it was 3 points. But he distanced himself from Trump. And this is where, he said he wasn't like Trump and that he didn't support Trump. This is where they're really kind of drunk on Trump having done a little better in some of these states like New Jersey, they think so. This guy now is embracing Trump fully. And Trump didn't do that much better. Secondly, the backlash to Trump is now massive. What we see happening in New Jersey, what we saw, of course, with the mayor of Newark, Ross Baraka, arrested, members of Congress threatened. One member of Congress from New Jersey now indicted, right? Representative MacGyver. I mean, this is for New Jersey an issue of democracy and authoritarianism.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'll just, 2021 was a bad year. 2023, I remember there was an article in Politico wondering if Democrats were going to lose the assembly. This was in October because I follow this really closely and I have this all in my head. And Democrats picked up 6 seats in the
It's what
assembly.
you focus on State of the States every Saturday.
Yeah,
People should
yeah.
listen on Sirius XM Progress
And,
127.
and I'll give you a good example too. Like the idea that Trump won this massive blowout and like he had a landslide was bullshit. It didn't. I mean, look, I'm old enough. My first presidential campaign, I worked on the Mondale campaign. Walter Mondale won one state and the District of Columbia. That was a blowout. What Trump had was not a blowout. They didn't pick up a lot of seats. They didn't pick up seats in the House. Sure, they took the Senate, but that's not what it was. Although the media played into it completely. And I remember earlier this year, at the beginning of the year, there were 2 special elections in Virginia. And in the lead up to it, one was a state Senate seat, one was a state House seat, House of Delegates seat. Literally CNN, New York Times. Oh, could Democrats lose? There was also a Republican seat down in the central part of the state. Oh, could Democrats lose these seats? And are Democrats exhausted? I talked to one of the candidates. They had the Democrats in Northern Virginia, the 2 in the Democratic seats. They overperformed. The Democrat who ran against the Republican, Jack Trammell, he way overperformed. He overperformed by about 13 points. And the only reporter who picked that up was Dave Weigel, who's at Notice or Semaphore right now. I think it's Semaphore. But then we had the special election in Iowa with Mike Zimmer. I talked to Mike Zimmer before that election. The most decent human being, and he ran on Iowa values. And I see this chatter like there's this big centrist push in D.C. right now. Like, well, it's only the centrists who are winning. Mike Zimmer, the day before his election, the day before his election, his social media that day was Iowa values, talking about Iowa being the second state to enact same-sex marriage. He won a seat that he wasn't supposed to win by about 4 points. Terrific guy. So we've seen that repeated. And I think it all kind of ties together as we're rolling into this election. I'll tell you, the Democrats in Virginia, there are 100 seats in the House of Delegates. I think they're going to have candidates in every single seat. Some of them won't win. Some of them won't, they probably understand, but they're going to go to every district and they're going to have a Democratic message. And the one other thing I'll say is, and I think is important, is I think there's something about the rallies this weekend and the protests this weekend that's very authentic and very real. There'll be local folks speaking at them. And there's something about talking to state legislative candidates. You can't knock on people's doors and just think you can recite talking points and not answer questions. When you put yourself out there like that, you have to be authentic. You have to be real. You make yourself vulnerable, as my friend Danny Cook says all the time. And I think that those folks out there spreading the Democratic message, talking to their neighbors, talking to people at the grocery store, they live in the districts, are going to be very important communicators for the Democratic message this fall.
And Joe, I just want to say for everybody listening, what you do on State of the States, and you just talked about some of it, but people who have Sirius XM or don't and want to get great reporting and commentary, every Saturday on State of the States, you focus in on the states and you focus in on what's happening, and obviously what's happening with regard to progressives. And you speak to these candidates, like you just mentioned, who the mainstream media and the national media are giving no attention to because they're on a narrative of, well, Democrats have to go to the center. You're talking to these people, you're talking about the issues that are vital, like democracy, like abortion rights, like LGBTQ rights, what people care about. and then they're winning, and then the mainstream media doesn't know what to do, right? And they sort of don't know how to spin it. But you're kind of, the canary in the coal mine, or at least finding that canary in the coal mine, right? Like, you're speaking to all these candidates, and boom, they win in the next election. Your show and the Down Ballot, our good friends at the Down
Oh,
Ballot.
yes.
People should go and subscribe. The Down Ballot. It's the hyphen downballot.com. Focused on these local races, and these local races are so important, not just in the legislatures and obviously shifting the states, but also for Congress and shifting Congress. So I just want to thank you for all of that.
Oh, thank you.
And I loved our first my first Substack live here on the Signorelli Report, and doing it with you. It's just been great.
Oh, this is so fun. I mean, like for everyone, this is Mike and I are chatting all day long on GChat, having these kind of conversations. So it's nice to be able to share with people. Yeah, and thank you. I mean, Mike, I appreciate that. I love doing State of States. I just consider it a real honor. And thank you for the work you do. You've been a hero of mine for a long time and a great friend. But I think we are in the fight. We believe, we know, like there are a lot of people join us today. Thank you to everyone who joined. We know the fight is there. We know people do not want, this is not what we want. And we know how literally perilous our democracy is. And I appreciate you and your platform and sharing it with me. And and I will say this, one of the things that always gives me hope is both listening to your show and being a guest host and talking to people around the country, because I think that's another great way of hearing where people's minds are. It's like,
Absolutely.
it is.
In all across, in the mountains, in the deserts, in the
Yes.
people in the middle of the woods, rural areas, cities.
Yep.
We speak to everybody, and it's a great community. Joe, everybody should listen this Saturday, of course, as you cover State of the State. I mean, well, they should listen to State of States, but as you cover the No Kings protests across the country, 12 Eastern to 3 p.m., people will be calling in. I'll be
I think
calling
it's
in.
going to be 1. I think it's 1.
Oh, 1. Sorry.
Yeah.
1 p.m. to 4 p.m.? 3 p.m.
I think
Okay.
it's 1 to 3 so far. We might expand it. Who knows?
Yeah. People should call in. These protests will be happening at all different times. And people should call in too, and be part of it if they're at the protests. And of course, I'll be speaking to you further on the show, and everybody listening. If you're a listener to my show, I'll be speaking to you at 3 p.m. Eastern time today. Thank you all for coming and being part of this today. It's been great, and I'm loving the comments. We'll, of course, read them all. And Joe, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.